Hello everybody. So I thought I'd talk tonight about something that is common to a lot of people. You know, this aspect of bloating. And I find that when I talk to clients, or I wish I had £1 for every time somebody asked me about food intolerance testing. Do you do food intolerance testing? Because the belief is that I have become sort of intolerant, sensitive, allergic to a particular food. And whilst it may be the case that there could be one particular item or food that's causing you a problem, very often this isn't the case. So I want to go in and explain this in a little bit more detail for you. And I thought I'd start with just sort of a couple of stories, typical stories. So I can give an example of Karen. So she had bloating and she decided to give up wheat because wheat is one of those common foods. So she gave up wheat, and yes, it made her feel a little bit better. Didn't get rid of her symptoms altogether, but it made her feel a little bit better. So that was great. The problem is maintaining it. She just couldn't sustain this diet. You know, she's trying to cook for a family. She wanted to have a bit of birthday cake, and then it's trying to find a recipe that doesn't have wheat in it. And then you might be buying some food stuff like some sauces or some soup, and then you look on the back and it's got some sort of wheat in it, and it just becomes harder and harder, and so she gives up. And then the bloating's still there. It sort of alleviated a little bit, but it hadn't actually gone away. And then you get people like Erica. Now Erica got bloating, and so she decided to give up dairy, and so she gave up the dairy. It helped a little bit. And then she thought, well, I know, I'll give up gluten, because gluten's another problem that causes problems for people. I know I've got other friends and I've heard and I've read about gluten being a bit of a problem food to digest, so I'll give up the gluten. So she gives up the gluten and symptoms sort of went away, and then they came back. She says, well, it sort of helped, but maybe there's another food that's causing a problem. Thought, oh, I feel a little bit worse. I've had some potato and the potato made me feel a bit worse. I'll give up the potato. And before you know it, it becomes a downward spiral of feeling like you've got to give up more and more foods. And I've had clients that have come to me in the past, and by the time they've come to me, and I really wish I'd met them months and months before, even a year before, because by the time they come to me, they don't know what's going on. And they've given up lots and lots of foods, and often it becomes these FODMAP foods, because, oh yeah, we hear about FODMAPs, and FODMAPs cause bloating. If you've heard of FODMAP foods, it becomes a spiral, and you feel worse, and you don't know what is going on. You don't know whether you can put foods back in. You're nervous too, and then you're getting other symptoms, and so it goes on. So this is what happens for many people. So it starts off with something's going on in the digestive system, and you feel that it must be a food that you become intolerant, allergic, sensitive to. But you're not really sure. You know, why is it that it's suddenly become a problem? And I think it's really important we take a little bit of a closer look and ask yourself honestly, well, is that bloating new? Or has there been something going on for a while? Is it just the bloating? Or was I getting a little bit of wind? Maybe I was getting a bit of bloating. Was there a little bit of constipation? My bowel movements maybe become a little bit irregular. You know, what happened first? And I call this a bit of a chicken and egg situation. You know, what came first? It's trying to establish that. And it's very difficult, isn't it, if you're in this bit of a spiral, trying to step back and think to yourself, you know, really, what did come first? Was there a problem with the bowel movements? Did it all happen over a particular period in my life? Something was going on in my life. These are all questions that I like to ask. You know, is it, you know, am I better for or am I worse for? These are quite important questions to ask. So this is what I suggest you start to think about if this is you, or you find yourself in any situation when you're thinking about bloating. Obviously, if you're thinking about food elimination, I wouldn't necessarily go down that route on your own. It's better to work with an expert. But before you even think about that, these are some of the things I think you ought to do. I'd like you, first of all, to deeply think about the stresses in your life. Now, I know we're all under certain amounts of pressures and stress and anxiety because of COVID, but if this is something that's been going on for a while, think back to when it either started or when it got significantly worse. And was there particular stressors in your life? Now, those stressors are stresses that are stresses for you. It doesn't matter that they may not appear to be particularly relevant or significant for somebody else. It's how you perceive it to be. It's what is a stressor for you. So, you know, it could well be that you are stressing over, I don't know, your daughter going off to university. And for other people, children going off to university is no big deal and you're excited for them, but for you that becomes a stressor. But at the same time as that, maybe you are moving house, or you're getting ready to move house, or you're having an extension done to your house. It's all become a bit problematic and you're trying to find the builder and the builder disappears. You know, these are all stresses, and it's how the stress impacts on you. Now, stress has very profound effects on our digestive system. You know, when we are stressed, it is telling the body it's not in the right frame of mind to be digesting food. So we have two arms to our what we call our sympathetic nerve, our nervous system. We have the sympathetic, which is our stress, fight and flight. And we have the parasympathetic, which is known as our rest and digest. And it's known that for certain reasons, because we should only be digesting food when we're in the parasympathetic state. Well, that's easier said than done, isn't it? When we're surrounded by different stresses in our life all the time. So often there can be these rumblings and niggles that are going on with our digestive system that we manage and we don't pay attention to, but it can be because of stresses in our life. So if it suddenly becomes a lot worse, the body is probably saying to you, could you please listen to me? I keep trying to say to you that I am feeling stressed, and you're trying to tell me to digest food while I'm stressed, and I'm struggling with that. I can't do it very well. And that's for a very important historic reason, that for our survival as humans, that when we were in fight or flight stress mode, it's because we had to do just that. And so all our energy and all our attention in our body had to be going on that fight or flight, which may seem irrelevant in this day and age, but our stress response works in exactly the same way. So it sort of turns off the digestive function. Of course, it's not turned off 100%, because you would be bent over, double, crippled with not being able to digest anything, and you wouldn't be getting all the nutrients from your food. So it's not 100% turned off, but it is having an impact on that digestive function. So thinking about your stresses is really, really important. Now, we can't walk away from all the stress in our life. I do appreciate that. But what we do need to try and think about at the very least is, what can I do to try and bring that stress down? And, you know, when we're eating a meal or before we start eating, just very, very simple things, thinking about doing some deep breathing, the sort of breathing we do when we're doing a yoga practice. It's all little things that we can do to just try and switch the body. It's like a sort of like a little pendulum. We're trying to switch it from the sympathetic into the parasympathetic. So it helps the body release digestive secretions. With the stomach needs to be highly acidic. We need digestive secretions from our pancreas. We need bile from our gallbladder. And they're all really important, different stages of digestion, but they are all impacted by stress. So it's a really, really important one. In fact, if anything, I think that is probably the most important, but it can then have a knock-on effect in lots of different ways. So think about the stress and think about ways that you may be able to just do a little bit of meditation, do a little bit of deep breathing, go on a very short walk before you think about eating, sit at a table. The mindful eating, taking your time to chew your food well, sitting at a table, don't have distractions, don't be looking at your food, don't be watching TV, eating slowly, chewing your food well. Just that chewing action, the sight and smell of food is really important. It tells the brain food's coming, and the brain quickly tells the stomach within milliseconds, really, that it needs to release hydrochloric acid and pepsin in the stomach to be helping to digest that meal. So it's the very first thing to think about, and it's really overlooked and not appreciated enough. And I do understand that we can't take away stress in our life, but there are some very simple things that we can do to try and help the body to digest that meal. Now, also, it's really important to think about where you're feeling bloated and when you feel bloated. These are really important questions that I always ask at a consultation. Are you feeling bloated really high up under the rib cage, you know, below the chest, or below underneath the sternum, in the rib cage, above the belly button? Because that area for feeling sort of bloated, maybe more to the left side, and it may be central. That area is your stomach. But if the bloating is below the belly button, it can be much further down. It could be in the small intestines. It could be sort of partly in the colon. It's hard to differentiate between the two. But knowing whether it's in the stomach or the small intestines sort of helps determine on what else might be going on. If it's the stomach, it very is linked to that initial release of digestive secretions to help support digestion in the stomach, and the stress has that big impact there. But if it's happening lower down, then we need to be thinking about what might be going on with the microbiome and the gut bacteria, and does that need supporting? And it does become a bit of a bigger subject than today, but it's worth thinking about where and when you get the bloating. So the where is it higher up or is it lower down? Could be both. And when does it occur? If it's sort of 30, well, it could be feel like almost instantly, but after eating, 30, 45 minutes after eating a meal, it's usually related to the stomach. But if it starts to build up as a day goes on, then it tends to be more small intestines and moving into the colon. So different approaches are needed in different areas. And as I said, as we move down the digestive tract, it could be more linked to this imbalance of bacteria. And what can be going on there is that the food, again, it can be linked to a lack of digestion and it's not properly digested, that some of the pathogenic, non-beneficial strains of bacteria start to feed off food that's not properly broken down. It shouldn't be there further down into the colon, and that can create gases. And the gases, of course, give the bloating, and probably wind as well, but not always. So it's important to start to be analysing and start to think about all these things about what may be going on, because it's not black and white. You know, bloating doesn't mean bloating. It can mean lots of different things. Where and when does it occur? And start to think a little bit about your diet. Really analyse your diet. You know, do you have an overconsumption of the same sort of foods? Is it really high in wheat? Is it, you know, a lot of people have far too much wheat and gluten type products in their diet. That's not to say that you have to take it out completely, but there just may be an overload of it. It's the same with dairy type products. If you're having a lot of cheese or a lot of milk, and then you might be having yogurt and maybe a bit of ice cream, it can be just an overload that's putting too much pressure on the digestive system. Dairy can become problematic because we're the only mammals to consume dairy after weaning. No other mammals consume dairy after weaning. So we are an anomaly there. But we can consume some dairy, but we may not be able to consume too much. And there are certain ethnic cultures that really struggle and can't consume dairy at all, and it's all linked to the sugar called lactose. It's you're probably familiar with lactose intolerance. Often though, it's not that you can't consume any, it's that you can't have an overload of it, and you may be able to have a bit. So, you know, if you had a bowl of cereal with a lot of milk, that can sometimes cause sort of bloating and cramping. And I think it's because you're lacking the enzyme called lactase, which we don't have, or lack it, and it struggles to break down the milk sugar called lactose. Now, interestingly, the good bacteria in our colon helps to break down that milk sugar, which is why if we've got good levels of good bacteria, it can really help the digestion of the dairy, provided we don't have too much of it. So I'd always think about, rather than saying stripping something out completely, maybe it's just an overload. Maybe you need to think about cutting back and having more variety and more diversity of different foods into your diet, rather than thinking it's one food, no wheat, no gluten, no dairy, and you've got to take them all out of your diet completely. Maybe it's an overconsumption of sugar. So sugar feeds the bad bacteria. They're going to love it. They're going to feed off it. It's going to create more gas. It's going to create some of that bloating I talked about. You know, so is the diet too high on sugars, whether that's simple sugars, it could be your refined carbohydrates. You want to have a look at that. You may want to reduce those down in your diet. And is your diet lacking in fiber? You know, we need the fiber, but it becomes a little bit of a difficult situation because some of you may go, well, it's the fiber that causes my bloating. And this is where dietitians are very much onto looking at FODMAPs as a diet. Some of you may be familiar with FODMAPs. It's taking out a lot of high fibrous foods from the diet with certain types of sugars in them, and they get relief from it. The unfortunate thing about that is that it's those fibers that are needed by the beneficial bacteria. So we again get into a really difficult situation. You know, we need to build up our fibers to feed the good bacteria. Some of those fibers are just what we know as good fibers, and others are known as what we call prebiotic fibers. Prebiotic literally means it's a food to feed the good bacteria. So if the balance of the good and bad bacteria is really out of whack, then it's very difficult, isn't it, to start to put in the right strains of fiber that we need, because you might then start to give fuel to the ones that don't want it, but at the same time we need to start feeding them. So the sort of foods that are really good as prebiotic fibers are your fennel and your chicory, apple. Unripe bananas, there's a thing in unripe bananas called resistant starch, and it's a fairly new discovery known as a prebiotic fiber that feeds some of these good bacteria. Onions and leeks and garlic, these very foods that some people are going to really struggle with. My advice would be to start with, if you struggle with a lot of these foods, is to start with stewed apple. It's my absolute favourite. Obviously no skin. And you stew apples with a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of water, obviously no sugar. Keep it in the fridge and have a couple of dessert spoons, tablespoon, whatever, could be more than that. Have a little bit of stewed apple every day. It's a fantastic fuel for the good bacteria. It has a lot of properties that help to calm any inflammation in the gut, really helps to encourage a really good beneficial environment in the gut to help those beneficial bacteria to thrive and grow in greater numbers. And when we start to do that, we can start to crowd out the bad ones. So, you know, looking at pureed apple is a fantastic thing, very gentle on the gut, and that's where I would start. But you need to start building up the fibre very slowly. Don't suddenly think, oh, I need to eat fibre, and then go in and eat a big plate of kale, for example, with all those woody stems that are going to be quite challenging. Bit of stewed apple is a nice one, maybe some ground flax seeds, but do it very slowly. Maybe some days have the stewed apple, maybe some days have the flaxseed, maybe try a little bit of other well-cooked vegetables, and I wouldn't go for raw ones because they're more challenging on the digestive tract, and just gently start to build that up. When we come back to thinking about bloating that might be occurring in the stomach, I would think about maybe using a little bit of lemon juice when you're eating your meals. At the start of the main meal, maybe 2 teaspoons of lemon juice in 2 teaspoons of water. That just creates and adds a little bit of acidity that the stomach needs, in a very gentle way, to help to increase that acidity that is needed in the stomach and maybe lacking. That is often what is lacking and causing bloating if it's happening higher up. I do recommend supplements for stomach acidity, but you need to be working with a proper practitioner to be putting things like that in. So those are my 20 minutes tips for today, to think about the bloating, why it might be occurring, where it's occurring, is it the stress? Reanalyze your diet, look at the stresses in your life, think about ways to reduce stress levels, and think about ways to introduce some of those more fibrous foods, the prebiotic foods, and always think about eating mindfully before you go rushing off to eliminate food types from your diet. Oh, and of course, not to overeat certain types of foods, rather than this complete elimination, because I find for many people, it becomes a downward spiral. You can't identify what's causing your problems, and we need to come back to the basics of good digestion. What helps good digestion from the top to the bottom of the gut. And usually, not always, but usually when we approach it from that way, then we start to, we normally find we don't have to eliminate anything. Some things may be more problematic, but we normally find that we can eat all our foods, most foods, in small quantities, if not in large quantities, without having to have complete elimination all the time. I'm glad you found that interesting, Kerry. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely week ahead. Bye.